The night before her wedding, Veslava did not sleep. She could still smell the smoke on her skin. Her sister Agrafena had smiled as she did it. And when Duke Vsevolod arrived the next morning and saw her ruined face, he did not turn away. He leaned closer. What did he see that her own sister was so desperate to destroy? If you already have a feeling about where this is going, drop it in the comments and tell us where you are watching from. It helps more than you know. And if this story is already pulling at your heart, please hit the subscribe button. We are just getting started. The morning of her ruined wedding was the quietest morning Veslava Dobrynova had ever known. Not peaceful, not still. Quiet in the way a house goes quiet after something inside it has been broken beyond repair, when the echo of the crash has finally died and all that remains is the wreckage on the floor. She sat at the edge of her bed with her hands folded in her lap. The bandage on the left side of her face was still warm from where the healer had pressed it, and the pain beneath it moved the way fire moves, not in a straight line, but in directions she could not predict or prepare for. It found the corner of her eye. It crept along her jaw. It settled for a moment behind her ear, and then it moved again, restless, looking for more of her to take. She did not cry. She had cried in the night, when Agrafena's maid had found her crumpled against the wall of the corridor, when the scream she had been holding in her chest had finally torn free. She had cried when the healer peeled back what remained of her veil to see the damage. She had cried quietly, with her hand pressed over her mouth, so that no one in the house would hear. But that was the night. This was morning. And Veslava Dobrynova had learned a long time ago that there was a limit to what grief was allowed to cost her. She was 23 years old, the second daughter of Count Dobryn, a man whose title was older than his fortune, which was to say that the title still stood while the fortune had long since crumbled. She had grown up watching her father smile at guests he could not afford to feed, watching her mother recount jewels that had been quietly sold off one by one, watching the house hold its breath every winter as the bills arrived. She had learned early what it meant to be the daughter who was useful rather than treasured. Agrafena was the beautiful one, the charming one, the one their mother dressed first and presented first at every gathering. Veslava was the one who managed the household accounts when their father was too proud to admit he needed help. She was the one who sat up late going through figures. She was the one who found the errors, covered the gaps, kept the whole fragile thing from falling apart without ever being asked and without ever being thanked. She had not minded. Or she had told herself she did not mind, and after enough years, the telling had started to feel like the truth. What she had minded, though she had never said it aloud, was that she had believed in Duke Vsevolod Yaroslavich. Not in love, not at first. She was too practical for the kind of love her sister performed so easily, all sighs and stolen glances and manufactured longing. But she had believed in the arrangement. She had believed that he was a serious man, a composed man, the kind of man who chose his words carefully because he meant them. She had believed that a marriage built on steadiness could grow into something real. She had allowed herself, in the privacy of her own heart, to want it. And then Agrafena had taken that wanting and used it like a weapon. She did not know exactly when her sister had decided to do it. She did not know how long the planning had taken, how many nights Agrafena had lain awake constructing the moment. What she knew was that the evening before the wedding, Agrafena had come to her room with a smile that Veslava had always mistaken for warmth, and a candle that she had tipped too close, and a curtain that had caught before Veslava understood what was happening. She knew that the fire had touched her face before she could pull back. She knew that Agrafena had not screamed for help immediately. There had been a pause, a breath, a moment in which her sister had looked at what she had done and not moved. That pause was the thing Veslava kept returning to. Not the pain, not the scar, not even the ruined morning. The pause. She was still sitting with it when the knock came at her door. She had expected her mother. She had expected the quiet devastation of it, the careful voice, the explanation that surely Duke Vsevolod would understand, that perhaps the engagement could be delayed, that perhaps there was a way to manage this. She had already begun to construct the patience she would need for that conversation. She did not expect the door to open, and for the Duke himself to be standing in the frame. He was taller than she remembered, though she could not have said why she was surprised by it. He was dressed for the ceremony that would not now take place, and there was something quietly wrong about that. The formal dark coat, the careful collar, the whole composed exterior of a man prepared for one kind of day who had arrived to find an entirely different one. He had been told, then. Whoever had found her in the corridor had made sure he knew. His eyes went to the bandage first. They always did. She had already learned that in the hours since it had happened. Every person who came through that door looked at the bandage the way people looked at damage they were trying to assess without appearing to assess it. A quick look, then a careful look away, then a performance of normality that fooled no one. He did not look away. He stood in the doorway and he looked at her, not at the wound, not at the bandage, but at her, with an expression she could not name because she had never seen it directed at her before. It was not pity. She would have recognized pity. She had been receiving versions of it her entire life, and she knew its texture exactly. This was something else, something that sat behind his eyes rather than in front of them, something that had the quality of a decision already made. Then he crossed the room. He moved without asking permission, which surprised her because she had decided in the months of their brief courtship that Vsevolod Yaroslavich was a man who asked permission before he did most things. He was controlled in a way that had sometimes felt like distance, and she had wondered once or twice if the control was a wall or a habit, or simply the shape of who he was. She had not resolved the question. She had not been given enough time. He stopped just in front of her, close enough that she could see the tension at the line of his jaw, close enough that she had to tilt her face up to look at him properly, which meant he could see the full extent of the damage, and she made herself hold still under it because she would not flinch. She had decided she would not flinch. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, quiet and very certain, "I am not leaving." The words dropped into the room like a stone into water, and Veslava felt the ripple of them move through something she had been holding locked since the night before. "You do not know what happened," she said. Her voice was steadier than she had any right to expect. "I know enough. You should hear the full account before you say things you cannot take back." He looked at her with that expression she still could not name. "Tell me then." She had not expected that either. She had expected him to offer reassurances, to perform the nobility of a man willing to overlook difficulty. She had not expected him to sit down in the chair beside the window, settle his attention on her with the whole of his composure intact, and simply wait. She found herself telling him, not everything, not yet, but more than she had told anyone else in those first broken hours, because there was something about the way he listened that made it possible to speak. He did not interrupt her. He did not arrange his face into expressions of sympathy that were really expressions of discomfort. He sat and he listened, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment, that felt different from the quiet she had woken to that morning. This quiet had weight in it, the kind of weight that comes before something is decided. "Your sister is still in the house?" he said at last. "Yes." He looked at the door, then back at her. "She will expect you to disappear." Veslava said nothing. "She is counting on it," he continued. "She has done this because she believes you will step back, that you will make it easy for her." He paused. "Have you given her reason to believe that?" It was not a cruel question, but it was a precise one, and precision in the wrong place can feel like cruelty until you realize it is actually something closer to respect. Veslava thought of the household accounts. The winters, the smiling and the managing, and the stepping back so that Agrafena could step forward. She thought of the pause, that terrible, deliberate pause. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "once." He looked at her with that expression again, and this time she was almost certain she understood part of it, though it still unnerved her, the certainty of it, the directness. "Not any more," he said. She did not know what he meant by that, not entirely. She did not know what he was offering, or asking, or deciding. She did not know what he had seen when he crossed the room and looked at her without looking away, but whatever it was, it had brought him here and kept him here and put that certainty in his voice. What she knew was that her sister was somewhere in this house, waiting, and the Duke had not left. He stayed for an hour, not to be seen staying, not to perform a gesture that the household would talk about later. He stayed because he had sat down and he did not appear to see any reason to rise, and Veslava, who had spent her entire life reading rooms and exits and the precise moment when a person was preparing to leave, could not find the usual signs in him. There was no restlessness in his hands, no careful checking of the window. He sat in the chair beside her bed, the way a man sits when he has already decided that this is where he ought to be, and the decision has settled in him completely. She did not know what to do with that. She was not accustomed to being stayed for. That was the honest truth of it, and she turned it over in her mind while the morning light moved across the floor and the house around them remained in that strange, suspended quiet. She was accustomed to being relied upon, which was a different thing entirely. People relied on Veslava Dobrynova because she was competent and because she did not make demands, and because she had the particular usefulness of someone who solved problems without creating new ones. Her father relied on her. The household relied on her. Even Agrafena, in her way, had relied on the fact that Veslava would always be standing quietly in the background, managing whatever needed managing, never asking to be seen. Being relied upon felt like being needed. She had let herself believe for a long time that the two were the same. They were not the same. Being needed meant you were a function. Being stayed for meant you were a person, and she was only now, sitting in the wreckage of the morning she had planned for months, beginning to feel the full distance between those two things. She thought about the first time she had met Vsevolod Yaroslavich. It had been at the Krasnov estate, one of those late autumn gatherings that the families of this particular circle attended, not because they enjoyed them, but because not attending would mean something. She had gone as her father's accompaniment, which was the role she most often played at such events, the one who stood close enough to intervene if the conversation began to drift toward money or obligation, the one who redirected gracefully. Agrafena had gone as herself, which meant she had gone in the blue dress and had laughed her particular laugh and had collected the attention of the room the way she always did, easily and without seeming to try. Veslava had stood near the fireplace and watched the room and done what she always did, which was to notice things. She had noticed Vsevolod because he was not watching Agrafena. Almost every man in that room had been watching Agrafena with the kind of attention that ranged from admiration to calculation depending on the man, and Agrafena had received it the way a plant receives sunlight, turning toward it without even appearing to notice she was doing it. But Vsevolod had been standing near the far wall with a glass he was not drinking from, and he had been watching something else entirely. She had followed his gaze to find that he was watching her father, watching the way Count Dobryn laughed too loudly at something a richer man said, watching the performance of ease that was not ease at all. And then he had looked at her, directly, as if he had known all along that she was watching him. She had not looked away. She was not sure why. She was not a woman who made a habit of holding the gaze of men she did not know. But something in the directness of it had stopped the usual reflex, and for a moment they had simply looked at each other across the room while the party continued around them, and then he had inclined his head, barely, more acknowledgement than greeting, and she had done the same, and that had been the whole of it. She had thought about it afterward more than she should have. Not because it was romantic. She had told herself firmly that it was not romantic, that she was a practical woman with no patience for the kind of meaning-making her sister performed over every sideways glance. She had thought about it because of what it meant that he had been watching her father and not Agrafena, because of what it suggested about what he was actually looking at when he looked at a room. She had filed it away in the part of herself where she kept the things she did not yet know what to do with. And then his family had approached hers, and the arrangement had begun, and it had been presented to her as the practical thing it was, a solution to the family's financial difficulty, a match of reasonable standing, and she had accepted it with the same composure she accepted everything. She had told herself she was not hoping for more than that. She had been lying. She could see it clearly now, sitting with the bandage warm against her face, and the Duke's presence filling the room in a way she had not quite been prepared for. She had been hoping, quietly, carefully, in the private language of a woman who has learned to want things without letting herself be seen wanting them. She had hoped that steadiness could grow into something. She had hoped that a man who watched rooms the way he did, who noticed the things most people chose not to notice, might eventually notice her. Agrafena had known. That was the thing that kept arriving at the front of her mind, and that she kept having to set aside because she could not look at it fully yet without feeling something that she did not have the words for. Agrafena had known that Veslava wanted this. Not because Veslava had said so. She never said so, but because sisters know each other in ways that go beneath language, and Agrafena had always known exactly where to press to find the tender places. She had known, and she had chosen the candle and the curtain and the moment with the deliberate precision of someone who was not acting in rage, but in strategy. That was what the pause meant. It was not hesitation. It was not shock at what she had done. It was Agrafena looking at the outcome she had planned for, and confirming that it was the outcome she had wanted. Veslava sat with that knowledge, and felt it settle into her bones the way cold settles, not all at once, but gradually, finding the places where she was least defended. "You are thinking about your sister," Vsevolod said. She looked at him. She had not said anything. She was certain she had not allowed anything to show on her face, because she had been carefully not allowing things to show on her face since before she could remember. "How do you know that?" she asked. "The way your hands change," he said. "When you were talking about the fire, your hands were still. When you stopped talking, they changed." She looked down. Her fingers had curled in her lap, not tightly, just slightly, the smallest closing inward, and she had not noticed it. She uncurled them deliberately. "That is a very precise thing to observe," she said. "I pay attention to what people do when they believe no one is watching them," he said. "It tells you considerably more than what they do when they know they are seen." There was something in the way he said it that made her look at him again, and this time she held the look longer than was strictly appropriate. She was searching for something in his expression, and she was not entirely certain what it was, only that she had the feeling, persistent and slightly unnerving, that he had just told her something important while appearing to say something general. "Is that what you were doing?" she asked. "At the Krasnov estate, when you were watching my father?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone caught, but the quiet of someone deciding how much of the truth to give. "I was watching everything," he said. "And then I was watching you watch me watch everything." The corner of his mouth moved, just barely. "You were the only person in that room who noticed what I was actually looking at." She felt something shift inside her chest. Not dramatically, not the way the stories described it, like something breaking open. It was quieter than that. It was the feeling of a door that had been shut for a very long time, opening a crack, just enough to let in a change in air. She did not want to feel it. Not today, not with her face in bandages, and Agrafena still in this house, and the whole morning constructed of wreckage. She was not a woman who trusted easy feelings, and she was especially not a woman who trusted feelings that arrived in the middle of catastrophe, because catastrophe had a way of making things feel more significant than they were. She knew that. She had reasoned herself through it before. But the feeling was there regardless, and she could not entirely close the door on it. "What do you want from this?" she asked. She was not talking about the Krasnov estate anymore. She was talking about the room, the staying, the not leaving. She was talking about the fact that he had said, "I am not leaving," with a certainty that did not sound like generosity and did not sound like obligation, and she needed to understand what it did sound like, because she was not going to let herself build something on the wrong foundation again. He looked at her for a long moment, and the thing behind his eyes was very present now, not hidden at all, just still unnamed. "I am not entirely certain yet," he said, but I know that whatever happened in this house last night was not an accident. And I know that the person sitting in front of me is not someone who deserves to be made smaller so that another person can seem larger." He paused. "I knew that before last night. It has simply become more relevant this morning." She did not know what to say to that. She was not sure she had ever been given something that honest without something else embedded inside it, a condition, a need, a subtle reminder of what was expected in return. She sat with it carefully, the way you sit with something fragile, and she waited for the catch. It did not come, which was its own kind of unnerving. They heard the footsteps in the corridor at the same moment. Light, quick footsteps with the particular rhythm Veslava had known her entire life, and she felt her whole body change in response to them. Not with fear, she told herself it was not fear, but something colder than fear, something that lived beneath it. Vsevolod heard it too. She saw the stillness come into him, the kind of stillness that was not passivity, but its opposite, a stillness that was actually readiness, arranged to look like calm. He did not turn toward the door. He kept his eyes on her, but something in the quality of his attention shifted, widened, took in the whole room without appearing to move at all. The footsteps slowed outside the door, then stopped. The silence that followed had a shape to it, the shape of someone standing very close and deciding something, and Veslava did not breathe for a moment that felt considerably longer than a moment. Then the footsteps moved again, past the door, down the corridor, fading. She let out the breath she had been holding. Vsevolod said nothing, but he looked at her with that expression again, steady and direct, and carrying the weight of something she still could not fully name, and she understood without words being exchanged that he had heard it too, had understood what the stopping meant, and had chosen in that moment to remain exactly where he was. It was a small thing. It was such a small thing. But Veslava Dobrynova, who had spent 23 years managing the distance between small things and the large things they added up to, felt it land somewhere deep inside her and stay there. Agrafena had not knocked. She had stood at the door, and she had listened, and she had walked away. She had expected to find a room already emptied. She had not found it. And what Agrafena does next, now that she knows the Duke is still there, will not be quiet. Agrafena came to dinner that evening as though nothing had happened. That was the thing about her sister, the thing Veslava had always known but had never allowed herself to say plainly. Agrafena did not feel guilt the way other people did. She felt it the way a person feels rain through a window, aware of it, watching it, entirely dry. She sat at the table in the yellow dress she wore when she wanted to appear softer than she was, and she spoke to their mother about the garden, and she passed the bread without being asked. And she arranged her face into the expression of a woman who had spent a difficult night worrying about a beloved sister. Veslava watched her from across the table and said nothing. Their father sat at the head of the table with the look he had worn since morning, the look of a man holding a complicated problem he does not know how to set down. Count Dobryn was not a cruel man. She had always been clear about that in her own mind. He was a weak man, which was a different thing, and his weakness had cost his family in ways that cruelty might not have, because cruelty at least had a shape you could defend yourself against. Weakness had no shape. It moved around you, and by the time you understood what it had taken, it was already gone. He had not come to her room that morning. He had sent her mother, who had come with soft hands and careful words, and the particular performance of maternal concern that Veslava had long since learned to receive without expecting anything behind it. Her mother had not asked what happened. She had said it was a terrible accident, and had arranged her face with such conviction that Veslava had wondered, not for the first time, whether her mother actually believed it, or whether believing it was simply easier than the alternative. She had not corrected her. Not then. Vsevolod had left before the afternoon, but not before speaking quietly with her in the corridor where they could not be overheard, with that low, deliberate voice he used when he was being precise. He had told her he would return tomorrow. He had told her to say nothing to her family about the substance of their conversation. He had looked at her with that steady expression and said, simply, that he was handling something and that he needed her to trust him for one day. She had almost said that trust was not something she distributed easily. She had almost reminded him that she had known him for 4 months, and that composed men with careful voices were not automatically trustworthy simply because they were composed and careful. She had almost said all of that. Instead, she had looked at him for a long moment, and she had said, "One day," and he had nodded. And something in the nod had felt like a contract. And she had gone back to her room and sat with the uncertainty of it, and tried not to think about how strange it was that the person she felt most steady around today was the person she had known the shortest time. Now she sat at the dinner table and watched her sister perform innocence, and thought about what one day meant. Agrafena looked up from her plate, and their eyes met. Her sister smiled. It was a small smile, brief and particular, the kind that existed only for Veslava, and that contained in its tiny arc an entire vocabulary. It said, "You are still here." It said, "I see the bandage." It said, "This is not over." Veslava held the look without blinking and did not return the smile. Something moved across Agrafena's face. Not guilt, not shame. It was closer to recalibration, the look of someone noting that a situation is not developing the way it was planned, and filing that information away for later use. Then she turned back to the bread and the garden conversation, and the yellow dress, and the performance resumed without interruption. Veslava excused herself before dessert. She went to the small study at the back of the house, the room no one else used because it had poor light and a draughty window and shelves full of her father's old ledgers that no one had touched in years. She used it because it was the only room in the house that felt entirely hers. She had been using it since she was 14 years old, and she had come in one afternoon to find that the numbers in the newest ledger did not match the invoices, and she had sat down and worked through them until the error was found, and afterward she had felt something close to satisfaction. Not happiness, satisfaction. The particular feeling of a thing made right that had been wrong. She sat at the desk now, and she did not open a ledger. She sat and she thought about the pause. She had returned to it so many times since last night that she had begun to wonder if she was punishing herself with it, if going over it again and again was a way of avoiding the next thing she needed to do. But she kept returning because she needed to understand it completely before she could move past it, because Veslava Dobrynova did not move past things she had not fully accounted for. That was how she kept the errors from repeating. Agrafena had stood in her room with a candle, and she had tipped it too close, and she had watched the fire catch, and she had paused. In that pause was the whole of her sister's character laid bare. Not the surface character, the laughing and the beauty and the easy way she moved through rooms, but the one underneath it, the one that had always been there, and that Veslava had been choosing not to look at directly, because looking at it directly would have required her to do something about it, and doing something about it would have cost her the story she had been telling herself about her family. The story was finished now. She heard the door behind her, and she was on her feet before she had made a conscious decision to move, turn toward the sound with her whole body taut, and then she stopped. It was not Agrafena. It was Vsevolod Yaroslavich, standing in the doorway of the study, with a document folded in his hand, and an expression that was not the steady, composed expression she had come to expect from him. This was something different. This was controlled anger. She could see it in the set of his jaw and the particular stillness of his hands, the kind of stillness that is not natural but imposed. He was a man holding himself very carefully, and she could see the effort of it. "I asked you for 1 day," she said. "It has been 6 hours. I know," he said. "I need to show you something." He crossed the room and set the document on the desk in front of her, and she looked at it. It was an arrangement of figures, not official, not stamped, handwritten in 2 different hands in a way that suggested it had been compiled from multiple sources. She read it once and then she read it again, because the first reading had not been possible, and the second reading confirmed that it was. It was a record of a private conversation. Not hers, her father's. Her father, and a man she recognized from the name as a financial creditor of some standing, a man whose name had appeared in the household ledgers in recent months, in amounts she had noted with concern. The record was not complete. It was fragments, assembled from what appeared to be a series of meetings, and what it showed was that Count Dobryn had agreed to a secondary arrangement, not with Vsevolod's family, with another family entirely, a family whose eldest son had been, until approximately 3 weeks ago, understood to be interested in Agrafena. Veslava read it a 3rd time. "My father made a second agreement," she said. "Without the knowledge of either family involved," Vsevolod said. "He took a considerable sum from creditor Melnov against the promise of the match. When Melnov's son expressed preference for your sister, your father told Melnov the arrangement could still be achieved." He paused. "He told Melnov that you would not be available." The words settled into the room like something dropped from a height. She looked up at him. "He needed the marriage to Melnov's son to happen," she said, and she heard her own voice, as though from a slight distance, very calm, very even, the voice she used when she was working through figures and needed to stay precise. "He needed me out of the way." And Agrafena knew. Vsevolod did not answer immediately. He looked at her with that expression, the one that had evolved over the course of the day from something she could not name to something she was beginning to understand, and he said, "I do not know how much your sister knew. I know that what was done to you last night served a purpose for more than one person. The full shape of it arrived then. Not in pieces, not in the gradual way she had been assembling it, but all at once the complete structure of what had been built around her and why, and she stood with it and felt the particular cold of understanding, something you cannot unfeel. Her father had not come to her room that morning because he could not look at her. Her mother had called it an accident, because that was what she had been told to call it. And Agrafena had smiled across the dinner table because she had not done this alone. Veslava sat down. Not from weakness. She sat because she needed to be very deliberate about what she thought next, and deliberateness required stillness, and she was having a difficult moment being still. Vsevolod sat across from her. He did not speak. He let the silence be what it needed to be, and she was grateful for it in a way that was almost painful, the gratitude of someone who has never been given the right kind of room and does not know how to receive it cleanly. "What are you planning to do?" she asked at last. "That depends on what you want." She looked at him. "You came here with that document. You have already done something." "I have made inquiries," he said. "I have not acted. I will not act without your direction." She held that. The deliberateness of it, the fact that he had come to her rather than to her father, had placed the document in front of her rather than using it as leverage in some conversation she was not party to. She had been managed around her entire life. Decisions made adjacent to her without consulting her. Consequences arriving without warning because no one had thought to include her in the architecture of them. And here was a man who had come to her first and said the next move was hers. She did not trust it completely. She was not capable of complete trust yet, and she knew it, and she thought he probably knew it too, but she trusted it enough. For now, for this moment, "Agrafena is going to come to you," Veslava said. "Not tonight, but soon. She is going to tell you a version of what happened that places her at the edge of it and my reaction at the center. She is going to be very convincing. I am aware of that. She is better at it than most people expect," she said. "People underestimate her because she is beautiful. They assume the two are alternatives." He looked at her steadily. "I did not underestimate her. I watched her at every gathering your family attended. I watched the way she looked at you when she thought no one was looking at her." His voice was even. "I knew there was something in this house that was not right long before last night. That is partly why I needed to be certain about you before the arrangement moved forward." She went very still. "You were not certain," she said. "I needed to be more certain," he said. "There is a difference." She studied him. The composed face, the controlled anger that was still there beneath the composure, carefully managed, not directed at her but present and real and on her behalf, which was a thing she was still learning how to hold. She thought about the Krasnov estate and the inclined head and the months of careful, quiet courtship that she had read as reserve and that she was now rereading, revising, finding new things in. "What made you certain?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "You did," he said. "This morning, the way you sat in that room, you were not performing composure. You were not waiting for someone to come and make a decision for you. You were thinking. In the middle of the worst morning of your life, you were still thinking, and there was no self-pity in it." He paused. "I have met very few people who can do that." She did not know how to answer that. She looked at the document on the desk instead, at her father's handwriting in the figures, at the shape of the betrayal laid out in ink. Outside the study door, somewhere deeper in the house, she heard footsteps again. Not Agrafena's this time, her father's. moving toward this room. Vsevolod heard them too. He looked at the door and then at her, and in the look was a question, not asked aloud, about what she wanted to happen next, about whether she was ready for the door to open and for the conversation on the other side of it to begin. She thought about 23 years. She thought about the ledgers and the managed smiles and the stepping back. She thought about the pause. She straightened in her chair. She folded her hands on the desk. She looked at the door. "Let him come," she said. But what Count Dobrin does not know, as his hand reaches for that door, is what is already sitting on the desk waiting for him. The door opens slowly, the way doors open when the person behind them is not certain they want to see what is on the other side. Count Dobrin stepped into the study and stopped. He saw his daughter first. Then he saw the Duke. Then his eyes went to the desk, to the document lying open on it, and whatever colour remained in his face after the day he had endured left it entirely. He stood in the doorway with his hand still on the frame, and he looked like a man who had walked into a room expecting to find one kind of conversation and had found instead the end of something. Veslava did not speak. She had decided in the moment before the door opened that she would not be the first to speak, that she would make him come into the room fully and find his footing and begin, because she wanted to hear how he began. She wanted to know which version of this he was going to attempt. He came in. He closed the door behind him. He looked at Vsevolod with an expression that was trying to be dignity and was not quite reaching it. "Your Grace," he said, "I had not expected to find you here this evening." "I imagine not," Vsevolod said. The pleasantness of his tone was precise and terrible. Veslava had not heard him use that tone before. The tone of a man who is being exquisitely civil because civility in this moment is sharper than anything else available to him. Her father heard it too. She saw him register it. "Veslava," her father said, and he turned to her with the expression she had been given her entire life when she was being asked to smooth something without being asked directly. The look that said, "You understand how these things work." The look that said, "Be sensible." The look that had, over the course of 23 years, asked her to be sensible about the accounts, sensible about the dinners they could not afford, sensible about Agrafena's comportment, sensible about her own diminishment. The look that had always found her willing. "You are not well today. You should be resting." "I am well enough to sit," she said, "and well enough to read." He looked at the document again. Something shifted in him, a decision being made and unmade and made again behind his eyes, and she watched it happen with a strange detachment of someone who has finally stopped caring which version he chooses. "That document is not what it appears," he said. "Tell me what it appears to be," Vsevolod said, "and I will tell you whether we agree." Her father moved further into the room. He was doing what he always did when he was cornered, which was to move, to create the impression of agency through motion. He went to the window and looked out at the dark garden, and she could see the line of his shoulders, the particular set of them that she had memorized without meaning to, over years of watching him manage situations he had created and could not control. "There were financial pressures?" he said to the window. "There are always financial pressures. The Melnov arrangement was a temporary measure, a bridge. It was never intended to supersede the primary agreement. And yet you told Melnov that Veslava would not be available, Vsevolod said. You told him this 3 weeks before the wedding. A pause. There was a misunderstanding. Was last night also a misunderstanding? The silence that followed that question had a different quality from all the previous silences in that room. It was the silence of something that could not be walked back. Her father's shoulders changed. Not dramatically, just a small, terrible dropping of something he had been holding up for a very long time. Veslava looked at the back of her father's head and waited. "I did not know she would do that," he said. His voice had changed. The performance had gone out of it, and what was left was smaller and older, and she recognized it in the way you recognize something you have always known but refused to name. "I did not know what Agrafena intended. I want you to understand that." "But you knew what Agrafena needed," Veslava said. He turned from the window. He looked at her, and she held the look and did not soften it. She had spent so many years softening things for this man, arranging her expressions to make it easier for him to sit across from her, and she was not going to do it now. "You knew that she needed me out of the way," she said. "You had made promises that required it, and you said nothing to me. You let me plan for that wedding, and prepare for that marriage, and hope for it, and you said nothing, because as long as I did not know, the situation could still resolve itself. Veslava, was I wrong?" He opened his mouth. He closed it. In the space between the opening and the closing was the whole answer. She had not expected it to feel like this. She had thought it would feel like the cold she had been carrying all day, the clear and terrible cold of full understanding. But it felt different from that. It felt like something she had been gripping for a very long time, and had now let go of, not because she wanted to drop it, but because her hands had finally given out, and the thing was falling, and she was watching it fall, and she could not quite account for what she felt about it, because she had not yet found the bottom. She stood up. She picked up the document from the desk, and she held it, and she looked at her father, and she thought about 23 years of accounts and winters and stepping back and the smile she had perfected that meant she was fine, and the space she had made and kept making for everyone in this family to occupy while she stood at the edges of her own life, managing. "I am going to tell you what is going to happen," she said. Her voice was steady. She was distantly aware of Vsevolod in the room, not looking at him, but aware of him the way you are aware of solid ground beneath you when you are standing at the edge of something. "You are going to tell Melnov that the arrangement is dissolved. You are going to do it directly, in terms that cannot be misread, and you are going to tell me the full extent of the financial situation, every number, every creditor, every promise made against my name or my sister's name that I do not already know about, because I have been correcting this family's errors for 9 years without complete information, and I am not doing it any more without complete information." Her father stared at her. "And Agrafena," she said. His jaw tightened. "Agrafena will stand in front of me tomorrow morning, and she will account for what she did. Not to the household, not to a solicitor, to me directly." She paused. "I am not asking for an apology. I have no interest in an apology she does not mean. I am asking her to stand in front of me and look at what she chose to do and not perform innocence about it, because I am finished pretending I cannot see her clearly. The room was very quiet. Her father looked at Vsevolod, and there was something in the look that she recognized as the last reflex of a man looking for a different authority to appeal to. A male authority, someone who would step in and moderate and bring the temperature down. Vsevolod looked back at him with an expression that gave him nothing at all. Her father looked at his daughter again. "You have changed," he said, and it was not quite an accusation, but it was not entirely a compliment either. It was the confused recognition of a man who had relied on a person to be a particular thing and had arrived to find the thing rearranged. "I have not changed," she said. "You have simply never looked." He left the room without the conversation he had come in to have, which was the only outcome she would have accepted. She listened to his footsteps move down the corridor and did not let herself think yet about what came after. One moment. She would take one moment first. Then she sat back down because her legs had made the decision before she had. Vsevolod did not comment on this. He was quiet for a time, and she was grateful for it, for the specific quality of his quiet, which she had come to understand over the course of this long, strange day, was not passive, but protective. He was quiet the way a wall is quiet, present, and solid, not asking for anything. "That was not what I expected," he said eventually. "What did you expect?" "Less," he said simply. And then, after a moment, "I was wrong to expect less." She looked at him. She had been careful all day about how much she let herself feel in his direction, because she was a practical woman, and he was a man she had known for 4 months, and the circumstances of the day were not conditions under which good judgments were reliably made. She had been maintaining a small and careful distance from the thing that had been building since he walked through her door that morning, since he said, "I am not leaving with that certainty," since he watched her hands change and told her what he had seen. But she was tired of the small and careful distance. She had been maintaining small and careful distances her entire life, and she was tired of the discipline of it. "Why did you come here?" she asked. Not to the house. She meant before. The Krasnov estate. The arrangement. You could have chosen differently. Your position could have secured a match with any number of families. Why this one? He was quiet for a moment, and she could see him deciding, the same deciding she had seen that morning when she asked him what he wanted, and he had told her he was not entirely certain. Only now the deciding had a different weight to it, the weight of something that had been waiting for the right moment to be said. "I watched you for 3 months before the arrangement was proposed," he said. "At 4 separate gatherings. You never knew." She stared at him. "You were always at the edges," he said. "Managing something, redirecting something, making something easier for someone who was not making anything easier for you, and you did it with no resentment in your face, none that you showed, which meant either you felt none, or you had learned to keep it so far inside that it had become invisible. And I could not decide which, but both possibilities said something about you that I could not stop thinking about." He paused. "I proposed the arrangement because I wanted to be in the same room as you long enough to find out which it was." She was looking at him, and she could not look away, and she did not particularly want to. "Which was it?" she asked. "Both," he said. and neither. It was something else that I did not have the right word for then. He looked at her steadily. I am beginning to have the word for it now. The air in the room had changed. She felt it the way you feel, a change in the weather. Not through any single sense, but through all of them at once. A shift in pressure, a new quality in what surrounded you. She was aware of the document on the desk, and the bandage on her face, and the collapsed shape of the day behind them, and she was aware of all of it, and also aware that none of it was the most present thing in the room at this moment. She thought about what she had said to her father, the steadiness of it, the clarity. She thought about who had sat across from her while she built that steadiness, solid and quiet and asking nothing. She thought about small and careful distances. I am not someone who is easy to be close to, she said. I have been managing my own interior for so long that I am not certain I know how to stop. I will probably mistake your patience for strategy more than once. I will probably look for the catch in things you mean plainly. I am telling you this because you told me this morning that you pay attention to what people do when they think no one is watching, and I would prefer that you watch me knowing what you are looking at rather than constructing a version of me that is less complicated than the actual one. He looked at her for a long moment. I would prefer that too, he said. She looked at the door. Somewhere in the house, Agrafena was in a room, and Veslava could feel the shape of tomorrow approaching the way you feel a storm approaching when the pressure changes. Her sister was not finished. She had stood at the door that morning and found the Duke still present, and she had walked away, but she had not retreated, and Veslava knew the difference between those two things better than anyone. Agrafena had walked away to recalculate. The recalculation was nearly complete. She is going to move tonight, Veslava said, or tomorrow before I can speak to her. She is not going to wait for me to set the terms. I know, Vsevolod said. She is going to go to you. Yes. She looked at him. And what will you do when she does? He held her gaze, and there was nothing uncertain in it. I will do what I told you I would do this morning, he said. I will not leave. She felt the words settle in her the same way they had settled in her the first time, like a stone in water, except that this time she did not work to contain the ripple. She let it move through her, and she let it be what it was, and she did not call it foolish or premature or dangerous, because she was finished making herself small enough to fit the spaces other people had decided were hers. The house was quiet around them. Tomorrow was very close. But Agrafena had been in this house all evening, and quiet houses have thin walls, and what she had heard through them had not made her less dangerous, it had made her more. Agrafena came to her room before dawn, not to the study, to her bedroom, where Veslava had finally gone after Vsevolod left the house, where she had lain in the dark with her hands folded on her chest and her mind moving through the shape of tomorrow, the way you move through a house you know by heart, touching each wall in the darkness, finding the corners without needing light. She heard the door, and she was already sitting up before it opened. Agrafena came in with a candle, which under any other circumstances would have been an ordinary thing. A sister coming in the night with a candle, and Veslava felt the deliberateness of it. The choice to carry exactly that, and she thought that there was something in her sister that enjoyed these small, precise cruelties the way some people enjoyed music, as a form of expression, a demonstration of a particular skill. She did not flinch. She had promised herself she would not flinch. Agrafena set the candle on the table by the window and sat in the chair that Vsevolod had sat in that morning, and Veslava noticed the choice of it, whether conscious or not, and she filed it away. Her sister was wearing her dressing gown, and her hair was loose, and she looked in the candlelight exactly as she had always looked in Veslava's earliest memories of her, soft and close, and the most familiar face in any room. It had always been the most dangerous thing about her. "You cannot sleep," Agrafena said. It was not a question. "I was sleeping," Veslava said. Her sister smiled, small and private, the smile that had no performance in it, because it was not meant for an audience. This was the version of Agrafena that existed only when they were alone. And over the years, Veslava had made the mistake of thinking that this version was the more honest one, the one underneath the performance. She understood now that it was simply a different performance, one calibrated for a different observer. "He stayed a long time today," Agrafena said. "Yes." "And came back this evening." "Yes." Her sister looked at the candle for a moment. "I want you to understand something," she said, and her voice had shifted into a register Veslava recognized from childhood. The voice Agrafena used when she was about to say something that was partially true and needed the partial truth to do the work of the whole. "I want you to understand that none of this was about you, not personally, not the way you are thinking of it." Veslava said nothing. "Father put us both in an impossible position," Agrafena continued. "The Melnov arrangement, the money, all of it, that was his doing, not mine. I was told that the match with Vsevolod was unlikely to proceed regardless, that there were concerns about the family's standing, that it was nearly certain to dissolve on its own." She paused. "I only accelerated something that was already ending. There it was. The architecture of it, clean and careful and arranged to look like explanation rather than justification, which was the structural difference between a person who was sorry and a person who was managing a situation. That is a very particular version of the truth," Veslava said. "It is the truth. It is the version of the truth that removes your choice from it, that makes what you did something that happened rather than something you decided." She held her sister's gaze and kept her voice even. "You decided. You came to my room and you decided, and afterward you stood and you watched and you did not move, and I need you to stop sitting in that chair and telling me a story in which your decision was not a decision." Agrafena was quiet. Something moved across her face, quickly and almost invisibly, and Veslava caught it in the candlelight. A flash of something that was not guilt, but was adjacent to it. The place guilt would be in a person who had more access to that feeling. Then it was gone, replaced by the careful composure her sister wore, the way other women wore jewellery, as a considered and deliberate adornment. "Vsevolod Yaroslavich is not what you think he is," Agrafena said. Veslava waited. "I have heard things," her sister said, "about his first engagement, about the woman who ended it, and why, about the kind of man he is in rooms where there are no consequences for what he says." She leaned forward slightly. "I am telling you this because you are my sister. "You are telling me this," Veslava said, "because I told father to dissolve the Melnov arrangement, and you know that he listened, and you need another approach." The composure held, but only just. Veslava could see the edges of it now, could see the places where it was maintained by effort rather than ease, and she realized that this, the seeing of it, was new. She had always been able to see her sister clearly, in theory, had always known in the abstract that the warmth was managed, but knowing a thing in theory and seeing it directly were different, and she was seeing it directly now, and it was not devastating the way she had always feared it would be. It was clarifying. "What you heard about Vsevolod," Veslava said, "I would like the name of the person who told you." A pause. "Why?" "Because I intend to ask him about it myself, directly." She looked at her sister steadily. "I do not require you to interpret the men in my life for me, Agrafena. I have not required it. I will not require it." Her sister stood up. She moved toward the window and stood with her back to the room for a moment, in a posture that might, in another conversation, have read as vulnerability. Veslava watched it and did not move toward it. "I am going to speak with him tomorrow," Agrafena said to the window. "With Vsevolod. I have things to tell him that you cannot tell him because you do not know them. Then you will say them in front of me," Veslava said. Agrafena turned. "Whatever you have to say to him," Veslava said, "you will say it in a room where I am present. Not because I do not trust him, because I am finished with conversations that happen around me." She kept her voice level. "I have managed this family's private disasters for 9 years, and I have done it without complete information and without being in the room where the decisions were made, and it ends now. Every conversation that concerns me happens where I can hear it." Her sister looked at her for a long moment. "You are angry," Agrafena said. "I am clear," Veslava said. "There is a difference." Agrafena picked up the candle. She moved toward the door, and Veslava watched her go and did not speak, because there was nothing more to say tonight, and she had learned over the course of this extraordinary day that silence in the right moment had more weight than words. At the door, her sister stopped. "I did not think he would stay," Agrafena said quietly. She did not turn around. "I did not think he would come to your room this morning. I thought he would send a representative and dissolve the arrangement by the afternoon." She paused. "I was wrong about that. It was the closest thing to an admission that Agrafena was capable of, and Veslava received it without softening toward it, because an admission of strategic error was not the same as an admission of harm, and she was no longer going to treat them as equivalent. "Go to bed," she said. The door closed. She sat in the dark for a long time after. In the morning, Vsevolod arrived before the household had fully assembled, which told her that he had not slept well either, or that he had slept and woken early, or that he had already done whatever he had gone to do the previous evening and wanted her to know the outcome before Agrafena had the opportunity to move. He looked the same as he always looked, composed and precise, and dressed with the care of a man who considered his presentation a form of courtesy to others. But there were signs, if you knew how to read him, and she was learning how to read him. There was a particular tension in the line of his mouth. His hands, when he set his hat on the hall table, were deliberate in a way that suggested deliberateness was required. She brought him to the study. He told her what he had done. He had gone the previous evening to creditor Melnov, not with threats, not with the kind of pressure that left marks, but with a document and a conversation that had been, by his account, brief and unpleasant and entirely conclusive. Melnov had not known the full scope of what Count Dobryn had promised him because Dobryn had been careful with what he disclosed, and when the full scope was laid in front of Melnov, along with the evidence of the secondary arrangement, the man had been, in Vsevolod's word, expedient. The Melnov arrangement was dissolved. The debt would be settled through Vsevolod's own solicitor, which was a thing, he said, the way you say a practical thing, without drama, without requiring acknowledgement. She looked at him. "You did not tell me you were going to do that," she said. "I told you I was handling something," he said. "I did not know whether it would succeed last night. I did not want to tell you the full shape of it if there was a possibility it would not hold. You did not want me to hope for something that might not happen?" He looked at her. "Yes." She sat with that, the specific care of it, the way it was arranged to protect her from a particular kind of disappointment. She could not remember the last time someone had arranged something to protect her from disappointment, rather than simply delivering the disappointment and expecting her to manage it. "My father's debts," she said. "Manageable," he said. "Not without effort, not without changes, but manageable." She nodded. She looked at the desk where the document had been, and which was now empty, and she thought about all the things that had been decided in this room in the span of a single day, the compressed weight of it, the way it had changed the shape of things she had believed were fixed. "Agrafena came to my room last night," she said. His expression did not change, but his attention sharpened. She told him what her sister had said, the version of events Agrafena had offered, the claim about his first engagement, the intention to speak with him alone. She told it plainly, without editorializing, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "My first engagement ended because the woman's family received a better offer," he said. There was no dramatic explanation. She did not end it because of anything she had heard or discovered. Her family decided that a count with recent holdings was more advantageous than a duke with older ones, and that was the whole of it. He paused. "I was not destroyed by it. I was disappointed, and then I was relieved, and then I spent a long time being more careful about what I was looking for." "What were you looking for?" she asked. He looked at her directly. "Someone who was still themselves in a difficult room," he said. "Someone who did not require a comfortable situation to remain honest." She held his gaze, and the thing that had been building since the morning before was fully present now between them. Not tentative, not preliminary, but real and weighted and asking for a decision. "She is going to find another approach," Veslava said. "Agrafena. She will not stop here." "I know. She has not finished." "Neither have we," he said. And the way he said "we" was simple and quiet and contained the kind of intention that did not need to be announced because it was simply true. She stood up and she crossed the room to where he was standing, and she looked at him clearly, without the careful distance she had been maintaining, without the small and sensible architecture of reserve she had built around herself so many years ago for such good reasons. "I need you to understand what you are staying for," she said. "Not the arrangement, not the resolution of the Melnov problem. I need you to understand that what is left after this morning is a woman with a scarred face and a complicated family and very little patience for things that are not honest, and I am not going to perform smallness to make that easier to accept. He reached out and he took her hand, not dramatically, not with the sweeping gesture that the situation might have permitted. He simply took her hand with both of his and held it with the same steadiness he brought to every other thing. And he looked at her face, at the bandage, at the whole visible evidence of what had been done to her, and his expression was not pity and not sorrow and not the managed warmth of someone doing the correct thing. It was something that looked very much like a rival. "I know what I am staying for," he said. She looked at their joined hands. She thought about the pause, Agrafena's pause, the moment of stillness before she chose not to move. She thought about how a single pause could change the architecture of everything that followed, and she thought about the opposite of a pause, about the moment when a person who has been still for too long finally decides to move. She had been still for a very long time. "Then stay," she said. Outside the study window the morning was full and clear, and the garden was wet from the night, and somewhere in the house Agrafena was awake and recalculating, and her father was sitting with the weight of what he had built and what it had cost, and all of it was real and none of it was finished. But Veslava Dobrynova was standing in a room that felt, for the first time in her memory, entirely hers. And the man beside her was not leaving. But the morning had one more thing in it that neither of them had seen coming, and Agrafena had been awake since before the Duke arrived. Agrafena had gone to their mother. That was what neither of them had seen coming, not because it was clever, but because it was desperate, and desperation had its own logic that was difficult to anticipate in advance. A clever move could be predicted if you understood the person making it. A desperate move came from a different place entirely, from the part of a person that had stopped calculating and started surviving, and Agrafena, who had always been so controlled, so deliberate, so architectural in the way she arranged her actions, had finally reached that place. Their mother came to the study door 20 minutes after Vsevolod arrived. She did not knock. She opened the door the way she opened every door in the house, with the assumption of welcome that belonged to a woman who had presided over these rooms for 30 years and had never been asked to question her right to enter them. She came in with her hands clasped and her face arranged in the expression Veslava knew as her most serious, the one she reserved for conversations she had prepared for, and she stopped when she saw Vsevolod standing beside her daughter, close and unhurried, with Veslava's hand still held in his. The prepared expression faltered. Then it reorganized itself around the new information with the speed of a woman who had been managing appearances her entire adult life and was not going to stop now. "Your Grace," she said, and her voice was the voice of a hostess, warm and steady, and already constructing the version of this moment that would be acceptable. "I had not realized you had arrived. I would have had tea prepared." "Do not trouble yourself," Vsevolod said. There was a quality in his politeness that Veslava had come to recognize, the quality that was courtesy in its form and something considerably more immovable in its substance, and she watched her mother receive it and adjust her approach without appearing to adjust it, which was a skill she had to acknowledge, even now. "I need to speak with Veslava," her mother said, "privately, if you will permit it." "I will not," Veslava said. Her mother looked at her. "Whatever you have come to say was sent by Agrafena," Veslava said. "And I told her last night that conversations which concern me happen where I can hear them. That means they happen where Vsevolod can hear them also." She kept her voice even, and her hands still. "Say what you came to say." Her mother was quiet for a moment. The prepared expression had fully dissolved now, and what was beneath it was something Veslava had rarely seen on her mother's face, something that looked, stripped of all performance, like exhaustion. A bone-deep exhaustion that had been present long before this morning, and that the morning had simply made visible. "Agrafena is unwell," her mother said. "Agrafena is frightened," Veslava said. "They are not the same. She has been in her room since before dawn. She has not eaten." Her mother moved further into the room, and Veslava could see the effort behind each step, the effort of a woman who had always moved through her home with ease and was now navigating it like foreign territory. "She is your sister. She is my sister, who planned what she did to me, and stood and watched it happen and waited to be certain it had worked before she called for help. She said it plainly, without heat, because the heat had burned out in the night, and what remained was something clearer and harder and more useful. I am aware that she is my sister. I have been aware of it every day of the 9 years I have spent managing the consequences of decisions made by this family that were never discussed with me." Her mother flinched. It was small, barely visible, but it was real. And Veslava saw it and did not soften toward it, because she had softened toward that flinch too many times. She had spent years moderating her own truth to spare her mother the discomfort of hearing it. "I am not asking you to forgive her today," her mother said quietly. "I am asking you not to destroy her." "I am not going to destroy her," Veslava said. "I am going to require her to be honest. Those are not the same thing either, though I understand they can feel that way when the truth is inconvenient." The room was very still. Her mother looked at Vsevolod then. A long look that contained several questions she was not going to ask aloud, questions about what he knew and what he intended, and what the future of this family looked like from where he was standing. He met the look with that steady, unhurried attention he brought to everything, and gave her nothing she had not already been given. She looked back at Veslava. "I did not know what your father had arranged," she said, "with Melnov. I want you to know that." Veslava looked at her mother, and she thought about 30 years of this house, and the careful not knowing that had been its organizing principle, the way inconvenient information had always been managed by not quite arriving at it, by standing close enough to its edges to maintain the performance of unawareness. She thought about whether her mother was telling the truth, and she decided that it was probably a partial truth, the kind that was true in its specifics and dishonest in its substance, that her mother had genuinely not been told, and had also genuinely not asked. "I believe you," Veslava said. "And I also believe that you made a long practice of not knowing things that would have been uncomfortable to know, and that practice has cost this family more than the knowing would have." She paused. "I am not angry with you about it. I am telling you because I think you should hear it said plainly by someone who is not angry, so that you can hold it without it being attached to anyone's fury." Her mother stood with it. She stood with it for a long time, and she did not argue, and she did not deflect, and she did not arrange her expression into anything. And in that unguarded moment, Veslava could see the woman her mother had been before 30 years of management had arranged itself into a permanent fixture over her face, the woman who had perhaps wanted to know things and had decided somewhere along the way that not knowing was safer. And she felt something toward her that was not forgiveness yet, but was in that direction. "Go back to Agrafena," Veslava said. "Tell her I will come to her this afternoon. Tell her I will come alone, and I will listen to whatever she wants to say, and I will say what I need to say, and we will find a way through it, or we will not, but I am not going to avoid it." She met her mother's eyes. "Tell her exactly that. Do not soften it." Her mother nodded. She moved toward the door, and then she stopped, with her hand on the frame, in the same way her father had stopped the previous night. And Veslava braced for one more thing, one more piece of the shape she had not yet accounted for. Her mother said, without turning around. "She was jealous of you. I think she has always been jealous of you. I should have seen it sooner, and I did not want to see it, and I am sorry for that." Then she left. The study was quiet. Vsevolod did not speak immediately, which she was grateful for, because she needed a moment in which the words were simply present without being examined. Her mother's "jealous of you" landed differently than the rest of it. It landed in a place that was not about strategy or clarity or the careful rebuilding of things that had been damaged, but in a place that was simply personal, simply human, the place where a person lives when they are not being capable or managed or resilient and are simply someone who had spent their life believing they were the background of their own family's story. She sat down at the desk. She put her hands flat on the surface and she breathed. "Are you all right?" Vsevolod asked. "I will be," she said. And then, because he had earned honesty and she had decided she was going to give it to him, it is a strange thing to hear. That someone who hurt you did it because of something they saw in you that you could not see in yourself. He came and sat across from her. Not the chair he had used before, but the one closer to the desk, closer to her, and she noticed the small adjustment and felt it. "What do you do now?" he asked. "I go to her this afternoon," she said. "I said I would, and I meant it. Not because I owe her ease, because I am not going to let what she did make me into someone who avoids difficult rooms, because I have never been that person, and I am not going to start." He looked at her with an expression she could name now. She had been learning it across 2 days, and she could name it. It was the look of a man who had been searching for something specific for a long time, and had found it, and was still slightly arrested by the fact of having found it. "I need to tell you something," he said. She waited. "When I came to your room yesterday morning," he said, "I had already decided, before I saw you, before I saw the bandage or heard what had happened." He held her gaze. "I want you to know that, because I think you are going to spend time in the coming weeks wondering whether my decision was made in response to your circumstances, whether it was pity arranged to look like something else, and I want you to have this to return to when you have that thought. He paused. I decided in the corridor before I knocked. I decided that I was not going to leave whatever I found on the other side of that door. I want you to know it was not about the fire. It was about you. She looked at him for a long moment. How did you know? She said. What to say? I did not know, he said. I said the true thing and trusted that it was the right thing. She thought about that, the simplicity of it, saying the true thing and trusting it. She had spent so many years with the true thing managed and arranged and released only in careful amounts, never quite all of it at once, always calibrated, always considered. The idea of simply saying it and releasing it into a room without knowing how it would land felt like a different way of living entirely. She wanted to try it. I was lonely before you, she said. Not obviously, not in a way anyone would have seen, but in the way that a person is lonely when they are very surrounded and very necessary and entirely unseen. And I had made my peace with it. Or I had told myself I had made my peace with it. And I want you to know that I understand now that I had not. She looked at the desk and then back at him. I want you to know that what you gave me yesterday, the staying, the document, the listening, it was not a small thing to me. I know it may have been ordinary to you. It was not ordinary to me, he said. She believed him. They sat with it, both of them, the shape of the 2 days between them, the compressed and extraordinary architecture of everything that had been dismantled and rebuilt in 48 hours. And she thought that there was no version of this she could have anticipated. Not the fire, not her father's document, not her mother's admission, not this man sitting across from her in the study she had used as a refuge for 9 years, looking at her like she was the solid ground he had been looking for. What happens next, she said, with the arrangement, with the family, with the practical shape of things? That is a conversation for clearer days, he said, when the dust of this one has settled. He paused. But I am not going to withdraw, if that is what you are asking. I am asking what you want, she said, not what you will do, what you want. He looked at her steadily. I want the chance to know you properly, he said, without catastrophe as the context. I want to sit across from you in a room that is not on fire, in every sense, and find out who you are when nothing is required of you. He paused. I suspect she is someone I have been waiting a long time to meet. She felt the door open a little wider. She had been opening it incrementally since yesterday morning, and she had been cautious with it, because doors that have been shut a long time can stick, can resist, can require careful handling. But it was open now, and the light coming through it was real, and she was not going to close it back. I will go to Agrafena this afternoon, she said again. Partly to herself, partly to him, partly as a commitment made aloud so that she would hold to it. And tomorrow I will sit with my father, and the real numbers, and we will begin to build something that does not require secrets to hold its shape. She looked at her hands on the desk, then at his face. And whatever comes after that, I will face it as myself, not as the useful one, not as the one who manages, as myself. Yes, he said simply. Outside the window the morning had fully arrived, bright and cold and indifferent to the previous 2 days, in the way that mornings always are, arriving new regardless of what has been lived through to reach them. The garden was ordinary. The house around them was ordinary. And sitting in this room that had always been hers, with this man who had chosen to stay, Veslava Dobrynova felt something she recognized with a start as something close to peace. Not the peace of resolution, not the peace of everything finished and settled, the peace of a person who has finally stopped standing at the edges of their own life and walked into the center of it. She still had to face Agrafena. She still had the long work of her father's accounts and the slow, careful rebuilding of a trust she had not been given grounds to extend easily. She still had the bandage on her face and the knowledge of what it meant, and the days ahead when that knowledge would arrive fresh and require managing. But she had this room. She had the truth she had said aloud and left standing. She had the man across the desk who was watching her with that expression that meant arrival, and who had said the true thing and trusted it, and she thought that perhaps that was enough to begin with. Beginning was enough. The rest would come. And it would, though not without cost, and not without the shape of Agrafena appearing in places neither of them expected, carrying the kind of damage that does not stay where you leave it. If you stayed till the end and you enjoyed the story and want to see more, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Stay tuned for more exciting tales and updates. Your support means the world.